Yeah, thank you very much, Katharina, and thanks to everyone for coming and attending this last of the 4 talks, which is called One Grammar or Two, and basically asks the question of when one takes a spoken language seriously, which is the title of the complete series, as you may remember, is it necessary or useful to assume that a grammatical system of its own for spoken language has to be assumed? Yeah, as some people, a distinctive grammar of spoken language. That's a question that has been primarily, of course, been asked in the philologies of the large national languages, especially the European languages, because obviously, as you know, they have long writing traditions, and they are also known for differences between spoken and written languages. But the question is there something really special about spoken language? And if there is something special about spoken language, what is it? Yeah, that's basically the question. And the answers you find in this European major national language grammar literature, like Biber's grammar on spoken English, but the same holds for German and French and many other European languages. If you look at this literature, there are basically 2 kinds of answers, unsurprisingly. The one answer is that on the is there a distinctive grammar of spoken language operating by laws different from those of the written language, is what Biber asks here, and then says, in fact, the main answer to this question provided by this book, meaning the Longman Grammar of English I just showed, is already clear. The evidence of the analysis presented in earlier chapters is that the same grammar of English can be applied to both the spoken and the written language. Obviously, no necessity to make a distinction here, and there is a different view, which is most strongly, or has been very strongly been articulated by Jim Miller and Regina Weinert in a book called Spoken Language, where they say it is correct that written language in general and spoken language in general cannot be clearly differentiated, since it is not just the medium that is important. Nonetheless, the spontaneous speech of people who have not been exposed to higher education, and a fortiori of people who have had only legal minimum of secondary education, displays large differences from formal written language. Yeah, so you have authors that say there is a major difference, and the difference has a lot to do with education. If people have gone to university, you won't notice very much anymore, but if you look at people who have only moderate or very little schooling, as you can get in some European languages, where you only go to class 10 or 8 or so, and then can go off to becoming a craftsman or something, then you get a grammar which is different because it hasn't been so influenced by written standards. There are very many misconceptions in these debates. I just mentioned 2 which are kind of important for today's lecture. The one is, and that's one of the favorite topics of Miller and Weinert, that many people kind of say that spoken language is a kind of reduced written one, or elliptical written language. Yeah? So then spoken language is just looked at as from the angle of written language and always basically seen as deficient. And Miller and Weinert and many other people have been arguing about against this view. And there's also this equation of spoken with informal and written with formal, which I will come back to shortly, and which we already had mentioned or discussed in the very first lecture. So today, what I will do is first briefly talk about another area where the spoken-written distinction may be of relevance, which is very little talked about, namely typological sampling. And then I will basically argue with regard to our main question, namely whether there is a distinctive grammar of spoken language, I will basically say no, I don't think so. But if one takes the process, what one has to do if one works with spoken and written languages, one has to take serious the processing differences between the two. And I will more specifically argue that prosody, or many parts of prosody, are a specific processing device for spoken language. Yeah, so that's basically the answer to the question at stake here. But let's first start with a topic which just illustrates another area, as I said, where the distinction between spoken and written may be of relevance. As most of you know, or will know, but as most of you are typologists or typologically interested, there has been many debates on what is a good typological sample. Yeah? And people say there are genetic biases and there are areal biases, and there's a longish discussion on how you can counterbalance these types of biases so that you have a really representative type of sample when you make typological claims. What has never been discussed in typology is the question of whether it makes a difference to compare the standard English grammar as it is taught in school with the spoken language grammar of a smallish Austronesian or Papuan language, which has been described by one linguist in one go based on transcripts and recordings. Yeah, is that the fair kind of comparison, or how should one do the sampling in that regard? Is it not an important parameter in doing the samplings? And of course, it makes a major difference what you consider English to be if you do a typological sample. Yeah, and I just give you a very simple and superficial example for that. In the interest of time and expositional ease, I take the features for relativization, which is very simple. Yeah, involves in the World Atlas of Linguistic Structures, you have these maps, yeah, where people have very short, very simple features coded on the map, typically color coded. So we have two maps on relativization strategies. So the question, which type of relative clause occurs in a given language, and so you have the distinction between relativization on subjects and relativization on obliques. And the values you can have is the relativization strategy in a language at hand is makes use of a relative pronoun, or there is no reduction, or there is pronoun retention. So the relativized term is mentioned again in the relative clause, or there is gapping, or there is no relative clause possible. So that's more, subjects are supposedly always relativizable, but obliques in many languages supposedly are not. So it makes sense for this second map to have this not possible feature. Okay, then of course English is said has relative pronouns, as it does in English standard grammar. But, and that's, I've taken the data from Miller and Weinert, who also make this argument. If you look at spoken varieties of English, it's not the standard relative pronoun, which is the most frequent and common kind of relativizing strategy, but the most common ones are either that complementizer or the gapping. And the gapping is even allowed, which is totally disallowed in the standard language, to be used for the subject position. So you can say, in various varieties of English, they say, we had this French girl came to stay. Yeah, where the who or that is missing. Yeah? Or my friend's got a brother used to be in the school, or there's a man in our street has a Jaguar. Yeah, so you have a relativization strategy with a gap, which is not possible or not seen in standard, and yet you have other options which are not accounted in the standard variety, such as shadow pronouns. as in the spikes that you stick in the ground and throw rings over them. Then you have there a shadow pronoun which takes up the relativized term, yeah, the stick. The spikes, you pick them up as them, or would those men, I call their names, step forward, would be another possessive pronoun uptake of the relativized term. Or you can also you can omit the stranded prepositions in sentences like, I haven't been to a party yet that I haven't got home the same night. Yeah, haven't got home from the same night would be the more standard type of relative clause phrasing. So, in short, what do you do if you do this typological sampling? Either you have to say that for English there are multiple entries, namely there's on the one hand a relative pronoun strategy, but there's also the gapping strategy, and there is also the pronoun retention strategy, etc. Or you have to enter multiple Englishes into your database and to say there is no English grammar, but there is the grammar of the standard written language, and there's the grammar of, that's what Miller is actually using a lot. There's Scots English grammar, and there is Southwestern England grammar, and what have you. Yeah, so various kinds of local spoken varieties. It's, as far as I can tell, an unresolved problem, and something which the typological community doesn't seem to be very interested in engaging with. But it seems to me that it's something where one really has to think about whether it's feasible to actually compare national written languages with smallish groups of or smallish speech communities who do not have a writing tradition. Yeah? So minimum I think one probably should do in a typological service is to enter English, a spoken variety of English as the representation for English. So coming back to our main topic, namely the question of whether we need two different types of grammars, spoken and written. I first briefly repeat a major point from the first lecture a couple of weeks ago, where I reported from the literature where it has been argued in the last 30, 40 years very strongly that one should or has to actually distinguish different channels or different modalities. On the one hand, so we have an auditory vocal channel and we have a visual graphic channel for speaking and writing. So that's a modality difference or a channel difference, and the difference in control of formality, involvement, distance. Yeah, that's a different type of distinction. And in the classic view, it used to be that written was basically always formal and spoken was always informal, and so the comparison was always lopsided. And the argument has been, and I think rightly so, that one really has to acknowledge that there is formal there is formal written, but there's also informal written. There's informal spoken language, but there's also formal spoken language. And especially, I mean, the whole debate was lopsided, of course, for a certain lack of data for informal writing. Yeah, but since the advent of chatting apps and WhatsApp, etc., you really have an enormous new source of a style of writing which wasn't attested very much before, and it's very clear that we have different types of written language other than the formal one. So in this debate also the question about the major distinctions between spoken and writing actually typically pertained not to the channel distinction, but actually to the control or involvement distinction. Yeah, so Chafe and many others have said spontaneous language, informal language, is characterized by fragmentation, short kind of pieces of syntagms which are loosely joined together. There is no complex complex subordination constructions and things like that. And in the writing, you get more integrated type of language with lots of subordination and various other kind of features that are repeated in that literature. What is of major interest here in this regard is, or the major question, as I said, is the question really of not so much this overall impression of fragmentation or integration, but rather the question of whether there are really differences in the inventory of grammatical structures. Yeah, so it's not the same thing to claim that in spoken language you often have this smallish type of fragment-like segments that are joined together. The core question is there no option for subordination? Yeah, then you would kind of say it's a real difference. So what I would say as a summing up of the literature in this regards, it is widely agreed nowadays that there are differences between formal and less controlled languages, regardless of spoken or written. Yeah, it's the difference between formal and informal is the most important one, and the differences occur in both modalities. But it is not the case that there are absolute constraints. Yeah, it is very difficult to claim for a single construction. This never occurs in writing, or this never occurs in spontaneous speech, and this never occurs in highly controlled speech, and the other way around. Yeah, one of the problems. It's not a serious problem, but it's a technical problem in a certain way. Is in as much as you find representations of spoken language in writing. Yeah, if you have a fictional novel and and you have dialogue in there, then of course you get in writing, or in some kind of formal setting, you get informal structures. Yeah, but overall as tendencies, it's clear there are these differences. And it is also clear, I think, but that's not so well kept track of in the literature, is that there is a principled and categorical difference between the modalities. Yeah, speaking and writing are completely different motor activities. The one moves the tongue and the other moves the hand. Yeah, to simplify it very much, but one shouldn't skim over, gloss over this difference. Yeah, it's a very fundamental difference that the output and the input systems for speaking and writing are completely different at the peripheries. Yeah, so even if you assume a single grammar or a single language system, you have to allow for different types of input-output systems with regard to speaking and writing on the periphery, because you have hands and tongues and ears and eyes. Yeah. But, and this is, I think, the most important point that is not new in the sense that no one has noticed it, but it hasn't really entered in full, hasn't been integrated into the debate in all its implications, and that is speaking and writing happen at totally different time scales. Yeah, so speaking is 3 times faster as machine typing, yeah, and it's 10 times faster than handwriting, and so there is a really enormous timescale difference between the two, and that, I think, is the core of the issue of what the difference between speaking and writing is about. So that in a relatively more complete picture of where the differences are, there is on the one hand a kind of continuum between informal, unplanned, spontaneous and spontaneous kind of language activities. Yeah, highly controlled and not controlled. That's a continuum, and that can be applied both to speaking and writing. And speaking and writing, the major difference is with relevance for language, and especially for grammatical distinctions or for the grammar of languages, is the time scale. Speaking is on a fast time scale and writing is on a slower time scale. Yeah, so this is basically the starting point for what I'm going to say in the next 30 minutes or so. The major difference between speaking and writing that actually impacts grammatical structure is basic processing speed. Yeah? Typewriting at highest speed is 3 times slower than speaking, as I just said already. Yeah, so my claim is basically, let's first ask the question, do we need 2 different grammars for slow and fast languaging? Yeah. So if you accept with the basic hypothesis or the basic claim that the major difference is one in timing, then the question about 1 grammar or 2 becomes a question about, do we need different grammars for fast and for slow languaging? Yeah. And my gut feeling, without being able to present a fully developed argument here, is that no, you don't need that actually, for various reasons. The main reason at this point being parsimony. There would be an enormous overlap between the 2 kind of grammars. And there's also, I think, or at least one would need to further corroborate that in terms of empirical data, but it seems to me that, or I haven't heard anything about differences between written and spoken languages on the level of word order, such that the spoken variety is VOS and the written variety is SOV, or the other way around. Yeah, so there may be certain constructions that occur mostly in the spontaneous and others mostly in the more planned varieties, but that there are really totally different kind of grammatical rule systems and also totally different paradigms is not attested as far as I know. Yeah, morphological paradigms, of course, there are differences. There are varieties of English with a third person singular S in the present tense, and there are S-less varieties, but yeah, and similar things, but they are not fundamentally different in terms of the makeup of the paradigms. So what I want to propose basically is that we basically have the same grammar, meaning we have a shared inventory of grammatical structures and routines that get deployed both in speaking and writing. But we have something which I would call modality-specific processing templates or filters, which are kind of put over these shared resources. Yeah, and they are, of course, modality-specific. So for speaking, I propose that we have something like a prosodic template, so that all the processing, all the creation of spoken output basically runs through a prosodic filter, or has to be matched to a prosodic template. Yeah, and the written output has to be matched to an orthographic template, or goes through an orthographic filter. I don't have much to say or anything to say at this point about the orthographic template, so it won't show up anymore today, but I will try to explain more what I mean by prosodic template or filter in the next few minutes. But let me first start what I basically mean in terms of processing. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the still widely standard model of speaking, which was proposed by Labex in the 1980s and has been elaborated in various ways, but as far as I understand the literature, it still stands as the major kind of model for ideas about what the processes are that are involved in speaking. And it starts at the very top with something which is called conceptual preparation. Yeah, and that's message content. You kind of have to have some message content and to prepare that in certain ways, and then the next major step is already grammatical encoding, and for grammatical encoding you have to have access to a lexicon where you get certain words with their grammatical categories, and then you basically turn that into a surface morphological structure, and then there are various fairly elaborate and detailed processes of phonetic and articulatory encoding. Yeah? And Lewald basically worked on all these different major steps in the creation of spoken output. And basically what my proposal amounts to on that level, and on the level of thinking about how how language is basically produced, I would basically claim that before we get to the grammatical encoding in the Lewald system, we have this prosodic filter or the prosodic phrasing template. Yeah, that's the basic idea, that this is a very high-level type of preparation for spoken output. And what the prosodic template basically is about is that the main function of the prosodic template is to provide for different phrasing options, that is creating chunks of what is to be processed together in both production and perception. Yeah, and the prosodic, that basically means that prosodic units are units of information. And with Chaire and some other people, I basically assume that the intonation unit is the most basic and universal processing unit. Yeah, so if you have heard me talk about these topics in the last 10 years, it won't come as a surprise that the intonation unit once again comes up as one of the core units in languaging, as it were. So to be a bit more specific about this, and this is the part that is at least partially new in this presentation, apart from the whole idea of talking about templates or filters, there are two basic mechanisms that are at work in what I call the prosodic template. The one mechanism is intonational phrasing, intonation units. In principle, so all languages have intonation units, and intonational phrasing on the level of the intonation unit is basically unavoidable, is the claim. There may be lower level prosodic units that may also play a role, but they would be more language specific. And the other mechanism that also basically leads to processing units is the level which I call the level of allegro processes, because these processes typically happen when you go into fast speech mode. Yeah, and the whole template idea is about these timing differences. So what I mean with allegro processes are things like omission of syllables and segments, assimilation, yeah, nasal assimilations, and various others. Vowel harmony is also a type of assimilation, liaison, etc. Yeah, all these types of processes typically define certain domains where they apply, and thereby they basically also give an input into the processing. What is in a certain way, not in a certain way, what is important here is that both international phrases and allegro processes are not purely abstract linguistic type, linguistic kind of units, but they are part of the physiology of speaking. Yeah, so I mean, it has usually the chunking into intonation units is often explained with reference to breathing. You cannot go on speaking for unlimited amounts of time. You have to make you have to break in order to have an intake of breath. But actually, the breathing cycles are much longer than the chunks that get created in terms of prosodic chunking of intonation units. But it's very similar in terms like breathing, because the hypothesis of Chaire and others is the chunks that are created in intonation units are the ones which are they get processed, yeah, both in terms of articulation but also of hearing, etc. So they are really part of the physiology of speaking, as it were, although they have something more to do with idea units and not so much with the pure physics of breathing. Now let's become a little bit more specific again. What kind of intonation unit templates are there? So far, and I'm not actually introducing this term in the concept of intonation units again. It already appeared in actually nearly all of the preceding lectures in one way or the other. What I'm interested in here today is to make a distinction between certain very basic types of intonation units or intonation unit sequences. And I actually are going to present you a distinction between three types of intonation unit templates or intonation units. The one I simply call sequence of equals, and the other are types of add-ons, and the third one is insertion. I have here now my standard example for intonation units, which also happens to be a very simple example of what I mean by sequence of equals. You often have, especially in narrative monologue speech, you have a sequence of intonation units which very often are also of similar size and length, but they are all of similar weight, in the sense that there is the first one, the second one, the third one, and they follow additively after each other. There is no relation of sub or superordination. They are all equal. Yeah? I play you this example.
You see his hand sometimes, a close-up, snatching the pears from the tree, and you hear the sound really strongly.
Yeah, so there are three lines, three intonation units. They are come one after the other, and it's not. There's no reason to say that the second one, the first one, the last one are more important, heavier, or something. Yeah, that there is a difference between them. They're all kind of equal. That is to be distinguished from what I call add-ons, where you basically have one standard intonation unit, but that's followed by another one which is much smaller and somehow prosodically also subordinated. Maybe I just first play you the example. Yeah, so the basic intonation unit is, the major intonation unit is die hätte mir immer ausgetrocknet. Yeah, those has he, me always taken off the shoes is the example. Yeah, it's from the Cologne dialect. And the important point is the main intonation unit is he took them off from me. Yeah, that's the first line. And then you have this short one, the shoes. And the shoes is not just shorter, as you can see. Yeah, the shoes is the last two words in the lowest line. Yeah, the shoe, that's an article and the noun for shoes. And what you can see is that in the main intonation unit, the valleys are deeper and the peaks, the summits are higher than in the intonation unit which only consists of the shu. Yeah, so that's some kind of tonal subordination, as you could say, where it's very clear that the shu is not the next intonation unit which has the same weight as the preceding one, but rather it's an add-on to the preceding one. Yeah, it's intonationally made clear that the shu belongs as an afterthought to the preceding one. Yeah, as a kind of clarification, possibly. Importantly, because I'm going to distinguish three different types of add-ons, I call this one full add-on, which basically consists, and you can, I mean, I'm working on developing a kind of representation system. Yeah, the first line is the normal standard intonation unit. Then you have the bar, and then the add-on is kind of put down. Yeah, is a subscript type of thing because it's subordinated to the main intonation unit. But it is an intonation unit by itself. Yeah, the intonation unit before it, Osjetrocke, ends on the verb. It's a complete intonation unit. It's not lacking anything or something. Yeah, it's a complete intonation unit. You have a short pause. You have a new onset. So basically, there are two intonation units, but they are not of equal weight. The one is much more important than the other. Then we have something which I call a latched add-on, which, if we start with my symbolization, starts out similarly. You have a full normal standard type of intonation unit, which also has its boundary event, signaled by the slash. But then you have, without a pause and integrated into the end of this intonation unit, you have a kind of reduced intonation unit which has its own accent but is not totally independent from the preceding one. Yeah, so that's it's basically like you would fuse two intonation units. They are still recognizable as independent intonation units, but much more fused than the one where before, where there was a real break between the one intonation unit and the other one. So this example, die fingen alle an zu heulen, die Kinder, is they started all to cry, the children. Yeah? They started all to cry, the children. And the children is this add-on thing at the end. Now I play it to you.
Die fingen alle zu heulen, die Kinder. Die fingen alle zu heulen, die Kinder.
Yeah, the heulen basically is the end of one intonation unit. You can cut that off and it sounds like a complete intonation unit. But it's very difficult, while in the preceding example it is very clear where you would make a cut between two intonation units. It becomes more and more difficult to do this here. Yeah? But the second part, the Kinder, die Kinder, still has characteristics of an intonation unit of its own, but it's flatter than the rest, again, like in the preceding example, and a kind of is fitted into the final boundary tone of the preceding intonation unit. So it's what I call latched on. And the third type of intonation unit I call fully integrated add-on, where you basically have the end of an intonation unit, but into the final tone, as it were, of the intonation unit, you kind of expand that and include more segmental material. The example is again very similar one. Ich habe die alle abgemacht, die Samen. I have them all removed, the seeds. Yeah? So it's, as you may have noticed, there are all kinds of constructions of right detachments or right dislocations where you normally have a pronoun, they here. Yeah? Ich habe die is they. Alle abgemacht. Die Samen is a noun phrase, the seeds, and there's a co-referential relation between the pronoun and the NP. But the prosody here is still different from the preceding ones.
Ich hab die alle abgemacht, die Samen. Ich hab die alle abgemacht, die Samen.
Yeah, ich habe die alle abgemacht, die Samen. So it basically the add-on is totally integrated into the preceding intonation unit. Yeah, and it's flat. Yeah, it basically continues the last level that the boundary tone of the intonation unit reaches, and that boundary tone gets simply extended. Yeah, that's basically what's happening there. So these types of distinctions. So I'm distinguishing 3 different types of add-ons to intonation units prosodically. And the kind of distinctions that have been mentioned in the literature by various people, including also Sarah Cutfield, who has investigated this for an Australian language, that people make a distinction between so-called anti-topics. That's the thing where it gets integrated. That's my last example. They call some things right dislocated NPs. That's the one with the Kinder, heute the Kinder, where it's integrated but still has some own substance. And then the independent afterthought kind of construction. So there's a three-way three-way distinction between with regard to the prosodies and with regard to functions. Yeah, and the important point for me here is it's interesting to see that not really many, but a number of people have noticed these different ways of prosodically phrasing add-ons. Yeah, so that I think that there is a good chance that there is some more generality to that it's not something totally language specific for German or Dalabon or some other languages, but many languages will allow for this type of expansion, one could say, of the standard intonation units. Yeah, you remember we had, as a first thing, we have the sequence of equals. Intonation units are all the same weight. And here now we have a subtype where you have add-ons at the right edge, which is going to be important later, where you expand a given intonation unit by certain prosodic means, which have something to do with the breadth, the extension of the pitch, and also the question of whether there are independent accent tones, etc. Okay. The important point, the second important point about these prosodic templates, apart from the possibility that they are possibly widespread across languages, is that they are, in my view, not construction specific. In the sense that they only come with a very specific syntactic kind of structure. Yeah, so I already mentioned before that the 3 examples I played to you purposefully were all the same syntactic structures. They had they had a pronoun and they had an NP, and they were co-referential. And the pronoun represented the NP within the main clause, which is also the main intonation unit. So basically, one could, of course, think, oh yeah, this is dislocation, constructions or detachments constructions, and they basically, you have to have a pronoun and you have to have an NP. But if you look at corpora, you can see that with the same prosody occurs with the pronoun and without the pronoun. So you could have sentences where you have no pronoun representative and only the NP in the afterthought construction, or you have not even an NP afterwards, but you can have a prepositional phrase. You sometimes can have short verbal phrases, etc. So there is no connex between my 3 add-on types and a specific morphosyntactic structure. Rather, you can have basically any type of morphosyntactic filling between the 2 elements of these types. And basically turning this around, if we have a construction with the pronoun and the extraposed or right detached NP, you can actually also put this into the template of sequence of equals. Yeah, you would think that if we have this typical pronoun, NP kind of afterthought, right dislocation, anti-topic kind of construction, they always go into some type of add-on construction. They don't have to. You can have the same kind of construction, but with the template sequence of equals. This is this example. Und jetzt kommt's das bittere Ende. And now it comes the bitter end. Yeah, you have the pronoun kommt es. That's the pronoun in the first line. Is in the one unit you have a pronoun, and in the next unit is the co-referential NP, das bittere Ende. But the sound of this is totally different.
Jetzt kommt das bittere Ende. Und jetzt kommt das bittere Ende.
Yeah, they are equals again. Yeah, they have the same type of the valleys and the peaks are on the same heights. Yeah, it's fully expanded. There is no compression in the second part, etc. Yeah, so you have the morphosyntactic content of a right dislocation, as it were, but you put it onto the prosodic template of a sequence of clauses, which is typically the case of the sequence of equals, what I call sequence of equals. Okay, let me briefly go on with this sequence of equals. Just to make that clear what it basically also contains, or what is a very typical type of attestation, is that what I just call this sequence of equals is basically something that you find in narratives all the time. Yeah, narrative event sequences. And I basically have here a very elaborate example from a Papuan language, Yali. Because in Papuan languages it is well known that people talk about these clause chaining constructions as something very specific or special. But I would basically claim, if you just look at the prosody, yeah, and also much of the grammar, it's basically the same type of constructions or the same type of sequencing you find in every language. It doesn't have to be a Papuan language. Actually, I can get into that later in the discussion, because I've noticed that the time is already, I mean, it's not totally late, but let me just play this example. Yeah, the basic point is that you have, if you look at the right-hand side, the translation is you have 6 units, which basically go. One basket that's not mentioned overtly is already full, and he goes up again to pick the others. He sees a little child on a bike, comes quickly. Yeah, these are on the one hand either NPs or they are short clauses, and they basically are put next to each other on the same level, as you can see here, see and listen to in this. Yeah, you can hear it's unlike the examples I played before. They are not equal lengths. Yeah, they can be longer or shorter. But they are, and that you can basically see here in the F0 extraction. I mean, there is one final rise in the middle which is quite distinctly higher than the others, but overall they are basically going up to the same high at the end of each unit, and the very final unit goes down. Yeah, the boom. Yeah, and the same thing. I play in German.
Dann kommt man mal näher, sie begegnen sich und er dreht sich um. Der Junge trägt so einen großen, breitklappigen Hut, den verliert er, und dann verliert er nicht nur den Hut, sondern auch die Richtung. Die Balance prallt gegen einen Stein und fällt um, die Birnen alle auf die Straße raus.
Ja, This is again not totally the same in terms of length, etc. And I would have to go through the signal and explain the grammar a little bit more. But the basic point is simply in narratives you typically have a sequence of equals, and not this type of add-on things I presented before. And there is, if you listened carefully, there is something remarkable in this regard in the middle, where you have something which says, und der Junge trägt so einen großen, breitkrempigen Hut, and the boy carries or has a big wide-brimmed hat on, which is prosodically an insert. And it's also grammatically an insert. Yeah? I mentioned at the beginning we have 3 types of prosodic templates: sequence of equals, add-ons, and inserts. And inserts is like, here he explains something in the middle of a sequence. He gives an extra information about the boy having a big hat on, which he hadn't told before. For people working with me on chaining in pronouns, this is a wonderful example where you basically have a pronoun chain about he, yeah, the boy, he, always is a pronoun, but in this insert you refer to the same person as with an NP, the boy, yeah, rather than with the pronoun. So the boy is the same one as the he in the sentence before. Yeah, which basically marks that also grammatically off as an insert. Okay, just for the fun of it, as it were, there are then several kinds of variations you can have with this sequence of equals. One very impressive one, I would say, is the one where you basically do this sequence of intonation units in a very fast way. Yeah, and this is an example from Tortoli, which basically means something. It was like that. His suspicion was because there were these riddles: 3 little children passing by carrying avocados, 1 each, is being produced like this. Yeah, yeah. The basic template is the same, but it's delivered in a much faster way than it is done in the preceding examples. Okay. Just one very brief remark on these templates I have illustrated now. There are 3 sequence of equals, add-ons with 3 subtypes, and the insertion. And of course the question arises, what's actually happening at the left edge of an intonation unit? I mean, there's left detachments or left dislocations. The examples I've been talking about are all about right dislocations. And I always thought, yeah, it's just the symmetry, but it's not, or at least not in my data. So I don't have a real good story for that, but if you have a kind of topic constituent, as in this example, which is also from the first lecture from Tortoli, then the butterfly cheated on him, yeah, made a cheat on that person, where you basically have, if I play the example again. Yeah, you can see then the butterfly, Bali Karibombang, yeah. If I look at the way these type of topic constituents are prosodically packaged in the data I'm looking at, I cannot see any major difference to distinguish this from a sequence of equals. Yeah, there's no signal that tells you this is the opening for something that comes. Yeah, what topic constituents do. I'm still in the process of investigating this, but at this point, I'm not able to say we have a similar kind of subtypes. We have other types of. We have types of add-ons to on the left edge. Yeah, we don't have anything which is prosodically something like a left dislocated topic type of construction. At least what I've seen in my data. It's not yet finished. There may be other reasons to assume this. Okay. Basically, and I'm already coming to the end. I have argued that essentially the same grammar underlies spoken and written varieties of a given language, but that the use of the grammatical resources varies in accordance with modality. In speaking, resources are deployed in a much faster and tighter time frame. That's the core thing. So the proposal is that the modality-specific processing is implemented via templates or filters, specifically prosodic and orthographic templates. Yeah, and prosodic templates are of two basic types, namely intonational phrasing and allegro processes. If you buy into this story, and this is the last 3 to 5 minutes, is basically there are some implications and then there are some open questions. The major implication is that there is no that there is more or less complete independence between prosodic templates and syntax. Yeah, that was the point in the middle where I tried to say you can have the prosody for an afterthought or a prosody for an antitopic, but what exactly the morphosyntactic fillers for this template are is totally open. There can be anything in there cannot only be a pronoun NP kind of sequence. And the same in reverse, there is no need to put something which morphosyntactically looks like an afterthought into the template for add-ons. It can also occur in the template of sequence of equals. Yeah, so complete independence between prosody and syntax basically means prosodic phrasing is not derivative of syntax, nor is it simply part of a complex sign. Yeah, the derivative idea is widespread in the generative grammar. Part of a complex sign is widespread idea in construction grammar. Yeah, in construction grammar you basically have complex signs, and their way of dealing with prosody is typically saying prosody is part of a complex construction. Yeah, the construction has a lexical features, it has a constructional features, it may have syntactic features, and it may have prosodic features. If in the model I'm developing here, the prosodic template is something completely different and independent of the rest of the grammatical signs and lexical signs. In a certain way, prosodic templates are not even part of grammar in the same way as syntactic patterns, morphological paradigms, etc. Yeah? They have a special status, as it were. And of course, prosodic templates are totally irrelevant for writing. Yeah? Because writing doesn't involve prosodic chuck. Those are the implications. The questions basically are quite a number. One is, are prosodic templates universal, or are they more a mixture of universal and language particular features? I don't have a strong idea on that so far. A more fundamental question is the question of whether the difference between slow and fast processing, which was my starting point, is really linked to the modalities, or does it make sense to say that there is slow and fast processing independent also of the modality? In particular, can there be slow processing in spoken modality? Yeah, can you do something? Can you have the amount of reflection and editing that you can do in writing? Can you do that in speaking? by creating a special speaking situation. Yeah, if that were the case, then you basically can say it's not bound to the modality, but it's really two different ways of working with language. Then there are more specific questions of the type, like whether the prosodic templates for narrative, monologue, and conversation are the same, or whether they are different. The question of what actually is prosodic highlighting, focus marking. Yeah, most people associate with prosody prosodic highlighting. My current position would be that's grammar. This is prosody in a totally different domain. It doesn't have anything to do with prosodic phrasing. Prosodic phrasing is one use of prosody. Prosodic highlighting is a completely different one. It's a much more restricted one. It occurs only in a few languages, as it were. It's a very European type of usage of prosody. It's a bit like lexical tone and other uses of prosody, which are really part of the lexicogrammar pool and not part of what I call prosodic template. And there is also the question of whether there still can be constraints between morphosyntax and particular prosodic templates. Yeah, that's a question regarding what I said at the beginning of these questions about the total independence between prosodic templates and syntax. Finally, to take spoken language seriously, if you follow this argument, means to pay attention to its fast processing features, and that in turn actually means that transcripts should be based on prosodic templates, namely basically showing phrasing and allegro routines. And it also has implications for the topic I started the whole series with, namely the question of transcription. And in this first lecture, I actually came to the conclusion that transcription is a form of writing, which now translates into transcription is a form of slow processing language. And it basically also means, which you basically can also observe when you work with native speakers on transcription, they do not necessarily, native speaker transcribers do not necessarily pay attention to prosodic templates, but rather to semantic content and grammatical structure. Yeah, and that has something to do with the mode or modality. Yeah, because transcription is writing is slow languaging, while speaking is fast languaging. And in fast languaging, you basically cannot reflect on structures. Yeah, you basically are processing, trying to get across your your content in a way that the hearer can pick it up easily. Thank you very much. So, Stefan.
Oui. Thank you very much for this very interesting talk. I have a question. I understand that your main point was about discussing the one grammar or two grammars, but I'm still a bit surprised that you didn't mention when you were showing the different type of add-ons.
Yeah.
You didn't mention the question of information structure for possibly distinguishing the role of the different, because you said that the different add-on have different contour,
yeah.
But the morphosyntactic contexts in which they appear are not different. But I'm still wondering, I'm sure there are not just variant, prosodic variant, comment dire, allomorph or...
Yeah, no.
and I'm curious, I would have liked to have your analysis about their role with regard with the information structure.
Yeah, I think I didn't make that very clear. Basically, or at least what I'm not at all wanting to claim that they are basically that they all have the same, that they are simple variants. No, they have different functions, and the functions have something to do with information structure in a broad sense. So, but the terms that I haven't really investigated this very in detail. The concepts that are on the market for this, the functional distinctions are these concepts of antitopic, afterthought, right elaboration kind of thing. So they basically, die fingen an zu heulen, die Kinder, they started crying, the children, where you have this integration thing that people basically assume that this is a planned expansion, where for some reasons you don't want the full NP within the clause at its normal place, but you want it outside, at least in German. That's widespread. While the afterthought is something which is basically not planned as beforehand, but rather the idea is that someone makes an assertion and then notices that possibly it's not 100% clear what the reference of the pronoun is, and the afterthought clarifies the pronoun. While the antitopic kind of thing, where the Samen, the seeds, where it's totally integrated and low, the basic idea is to say this is basically just also a reminder of what the current topic is. Yeah, but it's very low because it's not totally needed. Yeah, but I'm not 100% convinced that this is the best functional analysis of these three ways, but definitely there are differences. Yeah, very much so. So, Vanya is raising his hands.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to follow up on the question about the information structure. So you said that, and I see why you're saying that the prosodic prominence, such as beach accent, focusing or something, you're saying it's a different phenomenon. But I'm also wondering, do you think they shouldn't in principle be, like, there isn't a principal possibility of bringing the two together, for instance, as some sort of a sequence of weak and strong, or like a sequence of relative
yeah. A sequence of what? I'm not quite clear yet. I mean,
so I'm thinking about the add-ons, because they're all subordinate, that you can sort of conceive of them as some combination of a stronger base and a weak, and like in relation to it, a weaker unit.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering if this could be connected to how the prosodic highlighting could also be sort of a stronger point within a certain prosodic structure.
Yeah. I think I get what you are aiming at. But I'm not convinced that that's the way to go. Let's put it that way. But I would still have to think more about it. The stronger, weaker, I mean, these ideas of strong, weak is actually very much associated with rhythm, right? And feet structure. And that's a completely different thing again, from my point of view. And I would have to think about whether having things to do with stress and rhythmic alternations are similar to what I said for the add-ons. The add-ons per se, I mean, just listening to them, they don't have any rhythmic type of association. So that's already a difference. And yeah, but I mean, of course, it's clear there is a subordination relation. And you can always say this is the strong unit and that's the weak unit, but I'm not sure that it buys you anything in understanding. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I'd like to come back to this question whether there are left detachments, because you said you don't have any evidence yet to distinguish them from sequences of equals. So which kind of evidence would be needed that would convince you that it would make sense to assume that there are left prosodic, I mean, like the mirror image of the add-ons on the right side?
Basically, it would have to be they would have to have different pitch features.
All right.
From the normal one. So the normal unit, when I mean, this is of course language specific. In Germany, do you have accent types, and then you have certain boundary tones, and the height of the peaks and the deepness of the valleys plays a certain role. And so basically, oversimplifying it a bit, if you do F0 extractions, they should be visibly distinguishable just by the pitch track, as the add-ons are. Yeah, if you, I mean, you typically also by the length of the thing of the unit. But if you look at add-ons at the right edge, you see that suddenly something is smaller, is more compressed. Yeah, and so the left edge, it doesn't have to be more compressed. It could be also more strongly, the peaks could be higher and things like that. That's open. But there should be a difference to the normal standard look of an intonation unit on a fairly regular basis. Yeah, I mean that there occasionally can be enormous kind of pitch expansions upward or downward in a left or so. That's a different story. It would have to be a characteristic, as it is very common to characterize the right detachments or dislocations in terms of their prosody. If you look at the literature for left dislocations, it is the prosodic description is also is typically very perfunctory or superficial. It basically says there is typically a pause, and sometimes people say there's a rise and a pause, yeah, but not much else. But still, I mean, it's something to look at in terms of more data also. Maybe there are topic particles in languages of the world. Maybe there is also a topic prosody. But I haven't really come across it. And it's not only, I mean, the main candidates are topics and this kind of framing adverbials, temporal and local, yeah? So the next morning kind of unit, or having entered the house, things like that, yeah? Could be on the left edge of something. But it would have to be distinctive in terms of prosody. Thank you.
I have another question. So you seem to assume that there is, or maybe I should ask that question. So is there only one standard prosodic template in a language, or how many templates can it have? Or is it easy for you to determine that standard template when you look at your data?
What I call the standard template is an abstraction, depending on the. I mean, let's put it that way. Let's start from the language background I'm coming from. The languages I work on, they tend to be very trivial in terms of their prosody. They tend to be da, da, da. Yeah, basically flat rising, flat falling. So, looking at the topic from these languages, it basically it would be there is one standard type of intonation contour. Yeah, but that's not totally true. There are typically 2 or 3, but it's basically flat and a rise or a fall. Looking at English or German, there's not an intonation contour that is totally that could be said this is the standard, and then we have smallish variations in this regard. But rather, for English and German, we would have to distinguish 2 or 3 or 4 major intonation unit or prosodic intonational contours, yeah, which is with a strong rise or not so strong rise and a fall, and or the so-called hat pattern where you have a rise, then it's flat and it's falling. So there are in quite a number of European languages there are at least 4 or 5 standard intonation unit patterns. Yeah, and that's what I call the standard template. It would be an abstraction of that.
And it would complicate matters to determine. I mean, all these.
Yeah, but the for the add-ons, I mean the whole the examples I used were all from German, and the add-ons, they are characterized not so much by the tonal differences, except for the one which is fully integration, which is flat. Yeah, so totally flat type of stretches are uncommon in German and English intonation contours. But the other 2, in terms of their tonal makeup, they could occur somewhere in a normal or standard intonation unit as well. But the major factor is the compression. Yeah, the compression and the register becoming smaller, things like that. Yeah, and often there may also be some additional kind of indications coming from intensity, etc., creaky voice and other things. Yeah. So for add-ons, right edge add-ons, I'm pretty optimistic that they can be defined different from the standard one. Yeah, and I mean that's how they work. They work basically that they are recognizable as add-ons. It's a very important information for the listener that the shoes in the one examples are the ones that had been mentioned before, and this is just. Yeah, they continue to be a topic, or whether they are new shoes that become a topic for the following one, right? So this is depending on the prosodic packaging. There are totally different things associated with it. Okay, yeah.
I was wondering about what you said about the prosodic template being completely alien to the written modality.
Insertion.
Because in the very uncontrolled and fast writing, just texting, for example, people tend to send really short, instead of one big chunk, really short text messages. And very intuitively, I feel like there is, that the way that these chunks are made in texting, this really short text, whether the way that we truncate them has anything to do or any correlation with the way that we would do it in spoken language.
Yeah, that's a very good point, and that it's an empirical question. So I'm completely open, as it were, to how the relation in that regard is, how much it could be the case that especially chatting in WhatsApp type style tries to imitate at least spoken language, and then there may be an influence of the prosodic template there as well. But in principle, I mean, my basic idea is to say, I said I don't have much or anything to say about the orthographic template, but the basic idea there is to say that in the written language, the core units are clause, sentence, and paragraph. Yeah, and they are basically defined by the symbols for that. So you have a comma and you have a full stop and you have huh?
In the formal writing.
Yeah. No, in a formal way, but I mean that's what I think is what I would call the orthographic template about. Yeah, and that kind of asks for more expanded structures, etc. Yes, please.
Somewhat corresponding to the semicolon and so on, I found, or my impression was that for the various add-ons you showed for Cologne German, which I'm not a speaker of, is that the example with the children that has something like a medium intonation. That this indicated a close linkage to the following sentence. So it might be interesting to look not also at the relation of the add-ons to the preceding sentence to which it belongs grammatically and otherwise, but also to the possible relation to what follows.
Yeah. That's also something.
Unlike the example with the shoes and the third one with
the seeds.
With the seeds.
Yeah, that's definitely something to consider. I haven't really. I mean, there are some extended works on dislocation construction, also in French by Descartes or something. I don't remember. On Descartes, huh?
Pardon? By who?
Descartes or Descartes. There are a number of works on these different dislocation constructions, but I haven't come across. I don't remember having seen anyone writing about their relevance for the following segments for the next unit. So it's definitely a good idea to consider. Thank you. Okay, I think
yes.
It's perfect timing.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you very much also to the Zoom participants here, and let's thank.
Yeah, thank you very much for attending. Thanks to Katharina again for inviting me. I enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
Okay, and you will find all the sessions on the website to recapitulate, and I'm sure Nikolaus will be happy if you send questions and comments, right? Because it's a starting project, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay, bye.